out. Hooray. Seems like it's been a long semester, but all good things have to come to an end. What we want to do tonight is I will tell you about the final exam that you're going to take tomorrow, and then you can ask me any questions that you have about the exam or what's on it or what kind of questions. Alrighty. Okay, so the exam is cumulative. It covers everything from the first week of class. It covers all the topics and all the modules that are currently listed on the course outline. I've made some changes, so it should be accurate now. The exam is 60 multiple choice questions, so it's twice as long as the midterms. The questions will be similar. About half the exam is material since the second midterm. About a quarter is material that I tested you on the first midterm, and about a quarter is material that I tested you on the second midterm. You should probably focus on the most recent stuff because that's what you haven't been tested on yet. And so that's sort of the focus here, though there will be some questions on the earlier things. There is a big supply and demand problem. There are some other sorts of problems like you saw on the second exam. And the rest of them are basically questions that ask you if you understand concepts and you know how to use them. So that's it in a nutshell. You can take pretty much as much time as you want to, so don't let time be a constraint. That said, most people will finish in an hour or 2 hours. Somehow it seems to go quicker on the final, and that's always the case when it's the last day of finals. So what questions do you guys have for me?
Oh, you go.
So I was just curious if you could go over, is there going to be a utils problem?
Yes, there is.
Could you go over the way I think you went over in one video.
Sure.
But
Okay.
the way to maximize?
Okay. Given that budget dollars are scarce, if you want to maximize your total utility, you need to spend each dollar where it brings in the most marginal utility per dollar that you spend. So what that means is if I give you total utility numbers, the first thing you need to do is compute marginal utility. And then the second thing you need to do is compute marginal utility divided by the price. So that will allow you to compare every item using the same common denominator, marginal utility per dollar. Then you just buy items from highest to lowest until you run out of your budget. And if you do it correctly, it should be true that the marginal utility divided by the price should be the same for the last unit of every item that you buy. I'll make sure the math works out that way. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Can you repeat that last part you said?
Yes. You spend your budget by buying things from highest to lowest in terms of marginal utility divided by the price. And when you get done, when you run out of budgets, if you did your math right, MU over P for each item should be equal, should be the same. If it's not the same, then that means that you could reallocate your budget, buy more of the thing that has more marginal utility per dollar and less of the thing that has less marginal utility per dollar. And by doing that, you can actually boost your total utility. So when you're done, when you've maximized your utility, MU over P should be the same for everything. For one more, for everything.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Could you maybe show an example of a big supply and demand problem?
I can talk you through one.
Yeah, talk one. Yeah. 'Cause,
Okay. So the way you start when you analyze a market is you start by reminding yourself what the factors are that affect demand and what the factors are that affect supply. So the demand factors would be price, income, tastes and preferences, the prices of substitutes, the prices of complements, and expectations about any of those things can matter. The things that affect supply would be price, the cost of production, or anything that affects the cost of production, like wages or electricity prices or anything like that. And changes in technology that allow you to produce more of the product for the same cost or the same amount of product for less cost. So that would translate into an improvement, a decrease in production cost. And then finally, expectations also affect supply. Okay. Everything other than price shifts that curve. Okay. So if consumers' income changes, the demand curve shifts. Okay. If the cost of production changes, the supply curve shifts. If what you think is starting the story is the price of the product changes, you're probably wrong, because a change in the price of the product is a movement along the curve, or is shown as a movement along the curve. And what would cause that is a shift in the other curve. So the story has to start with a shift once you set up your basic equilibrium situation. Okay, so whichever curve shifts is going to give you a new equilibrium. If the demand curve shifts, you're moving along the supply curve. So price and quantity, the new equilibrium price and quantity are going to change in the same direction, either up or down. If the supply curve shifts, you're moving along the demand curve. And so the equilibrium price and quantity are going to move in opposite directions. One goes up, the other goes down. Okay. Then in the complicated problems, where both curves shift, then you're only going to be able to tell for sure what happens to either the price or the quantity, but not both. The way you figure that out is you go through the two previous cases and you say, did price go up or down here? And then in the next one, did price go up or down here? As long as they're going in the same direction, you can be sure when you put them together that that's going to be the change. When you can't tell, maybe it's the quantity. The quantity will go up in one case, but it will go down in the other. And so without knowing which curve shifts more, you can't tell for sure what happens to that variable. All right.
Yep. Thank you.
Sure. One of the things about the last three topics is you're basically applying the theories that you learned earlier in the course, and so it's a lot of review there.
So would pay wages, they would shift both curves, or just the
Well,
or just the supply curve?
you could argue that the demand curve shifts because workers' income has gone up, and that wouldn't be wrong. But the thing is that the effect on the market, the shift in supply, is going to be much, much larger than the shift in the demand, because the number of consumers is way bigger than the number of workers. Okay, I don't think there's a problem that changes demand on the final exam, just so you don't get confused that way.
Okay. And so if wages are raised, that would shift it to the left?
Supply would shift to the left because that would represent an increase in the cost of production for the firm. So they're going to want to raise their price to try to recover some of that cost increase.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
For the supply and demand, is there also going to be one for international trade?
There is, yes.
Okay.
So what you really need to know how to do is you need to know how to compute comparative advantage. So there is a problem about comparative advantage where you have to figure out which country has a comparative advantage in which good, and then and go from there, basically. So
Can you real quick go over the difference between comparative and absolute advantage?
Sure. Absolute advantage means a country can produce a product at lower input cost, lower labor cost than the other country. Okay, so if Germany can produce a car with 4 workers, but England produces a car with 6 workers, then we would say that Germany has an absolute advantage because it takes fewer workers to produce a car. Okay. Lucas, got that?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, but comparative advantage is really, really what matters, because it's possible that a country, a highly productive country, could have an absolute advantage in everything. Okay. So what matters there is comparative advantage. Comparative advantage means that the country can produce something at lower opportunity cost, which means in terms of the other good. Okay, so what that scenario would mean would be a situation where one country is better at everything, but it's way better at producing cars than it is at producing wheat, say, just to pick 2 things out of the air. So it would have a comparative advantage in car production because that's what it's best at. And it would have, and the other country would have a comparative advantage in wheat production because that's what it's least bad at or what it's best at.
So the comparative advantage is inside the nation, while
that's how
absolute is kind of. Huh?
That's how you would compute it. Yes. So
Okay.
it would be the cost of one good produced domestically compared to the other good produced domestically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are we going to have to know all the different trade laws?
No.
Okay.
I would rather, in general, I prefer not to ask you questions about things that you can just look up in the real world.
Yeah.
I would rather ask you questions that show your ability to use the material than to simply look up the name of a law or what it means or something like that. It doesn't mean I would never do that, but that's my tendency.
Would taxes shift both curves?
Which curves?
The supply and demand curves?
Sure. Generally, sales taxes or tariffs, say, shift the supply curve because those taxes are collected from the producer, and so they're treated as an additional cost of production. An income tax on personal income probably affects the demand curve because it reduces your take-home pay, and it's really your take-home pay that is affecting your demand.
Okay. And so that would also shift it, both of them left, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I was reading papers about tax reform and the federal budget deficit today, so I have taxes on my mind, unfortunately. Other questions?
I had a question again about which sections of the modules were being excluded from the
Sure.
last three that we were going through.
Yep.
I kind of lost track of which ones as I was going through each in Lumen.
Yeah, that's fine. Let's see. Let me look at the modules. Okay. So are you specifically talking about the last three topics? Adam?
I think he's muted.
Okay. Well, I'll pretend that's what he's asking.
Sorry, yeah, it was.
Yeah.
In particular, those last four: the public goods,
Yeah,
labor markets.
Yeah. Okay. Yes to public goods. You should know what a public good is. You should know what positive and negative externalities are. You should understand that that pollution and environmental problems are caused by negative externalities, and so you should know how to, what are the different ways of addressing problems of positive externalities and negative externalities. In the labor markets module, let's see. All right. The first section on labor markets, the second section on wages and employment in labor markets. I didn't really talk about discrimination, which is the third section, and so I didn't put any questions on the exam from that section. Let's see. Skip economic, or let's see. Did I pull that from there? No, I just pulled it. Okay, we're not doing the income distribution chapter, or module rather. And then the globalization and trade module. Okay, so let me jump into there, see what I can find. Comparative advantage, that section, yes. Trade barriers and protectionism, yeah, you should know about that. I didn't ask any questions specifically about trade agreements, but trade policy, it has to do with what sorts of trade barriers a country wants to use. So it might be useful to read that part of that module, or that part of that section. And that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Looks like you escaped your car, Adam.
I did. I was able to get away from 95 and get home before all the rain got down here as well.
Good.
It was pretty nasty from Lorton to Dumfries.
I bet. Other questions?
Will there be questions on like economic theory and stuff?
Everything is,
Well, sorry,
everything is
not, I
economic
didn't
theory.
mean like that. When we talk about like rational, like.
Yes, yeah, you should know basically what rational economics is, and
Okay.
all the intro stuff. But there are a couple of questions on those introductory modules, but not a huge number.
Okay.
Are there any specific equations that we we'll definitely need to use on this?
Yeah, maybe equations that, you know, define the cost curves or something.
Okay.
You know, average cost is total divided by quantity, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
Are there going to be any questions about any of the readings we've gone over?
I don't think so. Don't think so.
Okay.
What time is the reservation again? 7:10. Anything else?
Are there going to be a lot of questions about the different type of markets, or just kind of theory of them?
I think there are maybe one or two questions that say, you know, which of the following is an example of oligopoly or something like that. You just would need to know what the definitions are and then pick from the list. They're not that hard.
Very true.
How many questions is the test?
60.
Okay. Are we going to need to know how to calculate price elasticity?
Yeah, I mean, that's easy enough.
Yeah.
I mean, more you need to know what it is. So I don't think I ask you any questions about the arc elasticity formula, the midpoint formula, but you should know that elasticity is the percent change in quantity over the percent change in something else.
Okay.
Well, if you have questions, if you run into questions while you're studying, you're welcome to call me in the morning, and I'll be happy to answer for you.
One last thing.
Sure.
What are we? So, where in the? Are we just taking the test anywhere in the econ house, or?
It depends on what time you come. If you're coming other than 12 to 2, then yeah, come to my office in the econ house, and I'll find a spot for you in one of our conference rooms or classrooms.
Okay, sweet. I thought there were gonna be. I thought this was gonna be the biggest one yet, since it's the last and for the final. At least we're by your side.
Yes, exactly. All right. Well, I'll let you guys go, and I'll see you tomorrow.
All right. Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you.
For the time.
See you tomorrow.